What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you'll consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be breaking down the first episode in Season 2 of HBO's hit TV show, House of the Dragon. And just so you guys know, this video will contain spoilers, so if you haven't gotten around to watching the episode yet and you don't want to know anything that happens in it, you might want to exit this video now. And with that being said, no more wasting time. Let's get into it. So the episode starts at Winterfell with the choosing ceremony for the Night's Watch. We watch the chosen group then walk north to the Wall. And there we see Prince Jacaerys and Lord Cregan Stark going up top as he invokes the relationship between Aegon the Conqueror and Lord Torrhen Stark, formerly the King in the North, also known as the King Who Knelt, as he tries to convince Lord Stark to provide men for Rhaenyra's cause, recalling that the pair became allies over 100 years prior at the Wall. Now, Lord Cregan Stark praises Prince Jacaerys for not threatening him with his dragon. And I think this line is important because it tells me that the alliance between the Starks and the Targaryens has already kind of started to fracture, with people surely believing that Torrhen Stark made a mistake by giving up his crown to Aegon the Conqueror. And, this played out in Game of Thrones as well when Daenerys and Jon met. And Dany seemed taken aback by the fact that Jon wasn't immediately willing to bend the knee to her as Torrhen had, in that show 300 plus years prior. But back at the Wall, Prince Jacaerys asked Lord Stark if he would go back on his oath simply to have his soldiers stay in the north and fight wildlings and weather. But as they walk atop the wall to a lookout facing the north, the real north, Lord Stark asked the prince if he thought his ancestors built a 700-foot wall to keep out savages. And when the prince asks him, well, what does it keep out? Lord Stark simply replies, death. And Lord Stark finally offers the prince a few thousand older soldiers that he refers to as graybeards, which the prince accepts. And just then, the Raven arrives informing Prince Jacaerys of his brother's death. And I have to say, this group of scenes was really cool to see. It was really, really pretty awesome to see Winterfell again, and the Wall for that matter. Even more so to see them, seemingly hundreds of years, figuratively speaking, before we saw them in Game of Thrones. And when we finally get a look at the wilderness beyond the wall, it looks even wilder and more untamed than it did in the original show. For those of y'all who know me, I'm Team Stark all the way through and through. And we don't really have the Starks playing a major role in this particular story. So I'll get into my allegiances in this particular show later. But, I'm Team Stark mostly because of Ned Stark and of course Jon Snow as well. But yeah, that's where my loyalty lies, if anybody was curious. From there, we go to Dragonstone and we see Rhaenys arrive on the back of Meleys, with Daemon approaching her almost immediately, insisting that she accompany him to King's Landing in order to do away with Vhagar and Aemon. And Rhaenys asks if Rhaenyra gave orders to go to King's Landing, and Daemon responds by stating that Rhaenyra has been derelict in her duties as queen, and therefore, he seems to feel empowered to act in her stead. Rhaenys insists that they wait for Rhaenyra to return instead of acting rashly in her absence. And, the pair kind of argue, they kind of volleys back and forth over whether Rhaenyra, the mother, has the right to grieve her son's death, while Rhaenyra, the queen, if you want to call her that, is absent during time of war. Rhaenys tries to explain to Daemon what Rhaenyra must be feeling, having gone through something similar, you remember, when Laena died. And she tells Daemon that Rhaenyra had to go and see for herself of her son's demise, and that she was right to do so and not act on impulse as others might have done. And at this point, Daemon insists that if Rhaenys had acted when she had the High Towers at the mercy of her dragon, that Aegon's line would be extinguished and Luke would still be alive, which are straight facts. I mean, and this is why I thought the scene last season was stupid, because it wasn't a thing apparently that happened in the book, and the showrunners and writers simply made it up. And I thought it was dumb for this very reason. Because, why Rhaenys would let the Hightowers live just to fly back to Dragonstone and join Rhaenyra in declaring war against them was probably the dumbest decision that was made in the entire series to this point. And I honestly think it hurt Rhaenys as a character overall. Anyway, as Rhaenyra walks away, Daemon again insists that she travel with him to King's Landing, framing it as an order, but Rhaenys refuses him and instead enters the castle. And, like the impending dance of the dragons is the A story of the series and of the season, I think Daemon wanting revenge for his stepson's death is the B story. Now, from there, we go to Shipbreakers Bay, just outside of Storm's End, and we see Rhaenyra looking out over the water, no doubt searching for any sign of her son. She looks absolutely grief-stricken, and she's noticeably dirty, like she has not washed in days, which is no doubt meant to convey just how much these events have impacted her. Nothing else matters, not even her kind of stopping to wash herself. And so, I thought that was kind of a nice touch, something that was a detail that I think, really added something to the scene. From there, we go to Driftmark, and we see lots of people at the docks cleaning and repairing the ships. Corlys arrives, still healing from his injury at sea, which took place last season, if you remember, walking with a cane. He approaches a man that we know is Alan of Hull, and he talks to him about the ships and getting the ships back out to sea as quickly as possible to bolster the blockade. Now, Alan presents Corlys with a sword that he had commissioned for Lucerys, and offers his condolences for his heir's passing. And, he begins to walk away. But before he does, Corlys thanks Alan for pulling his body out of the sea. And again, this happened last season. And he tells Alan of Hull that he's indebted to him. And so I kind of see where this may be headed, because, we will see Alan of Hull's brother at some point in this season, and maybe even in episode 2. Now, back in King's Landing, we see Eric, with an A, walking along the ramparts, telling the men who are stationed there to stay focused. And clearly they're trying to keep an eye out for approaching dragons and that kind of stuff, because, everybody's kind of on high alert, because they're essentially, for all intents and purposes, in wartime at this point. And just then, Vhagar appears flying overhead, and we get a chance to see the Scorpion is sitting on the ramparts. And so it's kind of interesting because, if you think back to Game of Thrones, the Scorpions were made towards the end of the season, or the series, excuse me. And, to see them here, having been a weapon that was made, 200 plus years before, is just kind of interesting. That for whatever reason, they didn't know how to make scorpions at the beginning of Game of Thrones, but they learned how to make them towards the end. And now to see them almost 200 and some odd years before the events of Game of Thrones was just kind of threw you for a little bit of a loop. But, we see Vhagar appearing, flying overhead, with Aemon on her back, excuse me. And at first the men are alarmed, but once the dragon is identified and its rider, they all stand down. Now we see Aegon entering his sister wife's room, looking for his son, Jaehaerys. He claims that, Jaehaerys will one day be king and that he needs to start learning how to do so. And this was kind of interesting because if you remember, Viserys never did such things with Aegon. And so I think that Aegon has taken an active part in his son's life, because I think he's trying to show his son that he loves him, that he cares about him, and that he's going to put him in a position to succeed, because Aegon did not get that from his own father. And I firmly believe that's part of the reason why we are where we are now. What you have in Aegon is absolutely a kid who did not receive his father's love. And so he's now trying to prove himself worthy of sitting the Iron Throne. And again, like I said, this is something that I think that had his relationship with Viserys been different, Aegon would probably be a different person. But Helena, does not want her son to be king, apparently, and begs Aegon not to disturb Jaehaerys' custom. Aegon asks again where his son is, and Helena finally tells him that he's in the library. And as Aegon begins to walk out, Helena tells him that she's afraid of the rats. And Aegon and all of the chambermaids kind of look around as if they're looking for rats, and of course they see none. And so Aegon kind of chuckles, seeing this as just another example of Helena's, prattling. But this is a warning that will end up having a disastrous impact on Aegon and the Greens as a whole in just a little while. Next, we find Alicent in chambers with none other than Sir Criston Cole, with his face between her legs. So you see, he's not just a kingmaker, if you know what I'm saying. Apparently, he's a queen maker too. Cat daddy. Anyway, once they're done, both parties get themselves together, with Sir Criston reminding Alicent that they're expected at the small council. Alicent approaches Sir Criston, claiming that what they just did can't happen again, to which Criston simply replies, "Yes, Your Grace." Now, as the pair walk throughout the palace, we see an unidentified man walking around with rat traps. And this is an example of the Chekhov's gun principle, using a character instead of an item of later importance. And for those of you who don't know what that is, Chekhov's gun is a narrative principle that states that every element in a story must be necessary, and irrelevant elements should be removed. For example, if a writer features a gun in a story, there must be a reason for it, such as it being fired sometime later in the plot. And all elements must eventually come into play at some point in the story. Now, there are some authors, even authors as famous as Hemingway, who do not agree with this principle, but I do. It just works for less clutter. Now, as Alicent and Sir Criston arrive at the small council meeting, just as Aegon arrives with his son, Jaehaerys disturbs the meeting, as children tend to do, while the council attempts to strategize. Aegon suggests that Sir Tywin Lannister, Master of Coin, gives Jaehaerys a horsey ride or piggyback ride, or whatever you want to call it, before Alicent finally puts a stop to the disruption. Aemon arrives at the meeting to his mother's chagrin and begins to offer his thoughts on how the group should proceed. And Aegon wants to call his dragons to war. Like, his mother's against the idea, but Aegon decides, he wants to fly the River Run in order to force Lord Tully to side with him, or burn, essentially. And Otto, counsels restraint. Now, after the meeting, Lord Larys encounters Alicent on her way to somewhere, and subtly he makes it known that he knows what she's been up to with Sir Criston. He just mad because he can't get at them toes no more. But he goes on to tell Alicent that he has questioned all of the castle staff and that they have produced interesting details, but that he is ultimately satisfied that he's found all of those who had betrayed them last season. Which last season and this season is only a handful of days. So, but that's how closely the two seasons have happened, in real time. But when Alicent asks what he did with them, he basically just tells them that they no longer breathe their air, which Alicent seems to be conflicted about. But I mean, at this point, I think she knows what she's getting with Lord Larys. So I mean, he's a wild boy. But this conversation at large is important because I think that Lord Larys has already shown himself to be, as I said, a dangerous person, much more dangerous than Sir Criston. Because remember, he burned alive both his daddy and his brother in Harrenhal last season, with zero what's given. So Larys, you got to keep an eye on him. I mean, he the kind of person where you walk in the room and be like, man, I hate so-and-so, and then you find out the next day that they no longer breathe your air. So, I mean, you just got to keep him on a tight leash. But I think this may end up being the C story, or at least part of it. because I wonder how Alicent, Sir Kristen, and Lord Larys of it all shapes out. Because I absolutely think it will have a bigger part to play in exactly how this conflict proceeds from a micro standpoint, especially this season. So, I guess we'll find out. We next see Alicent, taking a bath. I assume with the new staff. But after she sees one of the staff, one of the bed maids, pour something in her water, she dismisses everyone and decides to wash herself. And I think this is her kind of realizing that she might not be able to trust everybody who attends to her because Larys has replaced all of her old people with new people. And now that he's made it clear that he kind of knows what's up between her and Sir Kristen, I think maybe she doesn't exactly feel safe with the people who are attending to her. And, again, like I said, I think this is just going to be a larger and larger issue as the season, proceeds. Now, back at Shipbreaker Bay, Rhaenyra sees ships on the shore, and she gets on Syrax and she flies over, scaring away all the fishermen. But she's not there for them. She's there to search the contents of the fishing boats. And when she does, she finds mangled dragon wings of Arax, her son's dragon, and some of his clothing. And in response, she just kneels on the beach and she weeps, and so does her dragon. Now, we find Aegon in the throne room receiving petitions. And, as he's hearing the petitioners, he seems to be really open to their concerns and trying to make them right. And again, I think this is Aegon trying to prove he's a good king, right? To the small folk, right? And so he's just giving everybody, you get a car, you get a car, you get a car. Like whatever they're asking for, he's like, done. And so Otto finally kind of approaches him and goes, hey, look, we can't do that. We're going to be at war here soon. And so you can't just be giving people goats and sheep and stuff like that because the dragons are going to need to eat. And you just can't. And once you start offering this to one person, people are going to get wind of it and everybody's going to be lined up here asking for things and we just can't afford to do it. So, again, like I said, Otto does this right in front of everybody. And I think he basically just wants Aegon to stop being, a soft you-know-what. Which prompts Aegon to immediately go back on the promises he made to the petitioners before they even have a chance to leave the room. And we see that Lord Larys is standing on the balcony watching all of this. And so, we know that he's got something up his sleeves where even Aegon is concerned as well. And I think this is a character development scene for Aegon, as was the scene in the small council chamber, because it's meant to show, like I said, what kind of king he is right now. I think it's meant to show us that, he can kind of run hot and cold. And in the small council, he was all fire and brimstone. And now here in front of the small folk, as they are, he's something else. And whether that will prove to work in his favor or not remains to be seen. But I have a feeling that by next episode, we're going to see a much, much, much different Aegon. Now, Lord Larys approaches Aegon as he's leaving the throne room and he begs him not to let Sir Otto control him the way he did his father. He implores Aegon to dismiss him as Hand of the King in favor of another. And now the conversation is cut off here, but I'm assuming that he means himself. So Lord Larys is making moves, and we're definitely going to, again, like I said, you got to keep an eye on this dude because he'd be in the shadows, peeping everything that's going on. He don't walk all that fast, so he's privy to a lot that's going on. And somebody need to get my man some feet to put in his mouth so he can have something to occupy his time. But anyway, Alicent is in her chambers reading the mail when Sir Otto comes in and they have a talk about her feeling like he's not been on her side as of late. She claims that she wants Rhaenyra to bend the knee and have Aegon sit the Iron Throne in peace, as Viserys wished. I want people to really pay attention to that because I think that a lot of people are getting lost in the sauce here, because I've even had a lot of people just in the last 24 hours come at me on Facebook telling me that the Greens usurped the throne. And I'm like, that's not exactly how that went. Keep in mind how this whole thing went left, because last season, with his dying breath, as Alicent attended to him in a room all by herself, Viserys spoke of Aegon and the prince that was promised, leading Alicent to believe that he had changed his mind about who exactly he wanted to be his heir. I need people to really, really understand that. Because as we're watching this show, we have to remember that we have information that the characters don't have because we've been privy to all the conversations. The characters have only been privy to the conversations that they themselves have had with other people. And in episode 2 of season 1, Viserys mentioned to Alicent that he thought about changing his mind and making Aegon his heir because he had the dragon dream about how Aegon was going to wear the Conqueror's crown, wielding the Conqueror's sword, and how he was going to save all of humanity. And so when he brings this up, I understand completely how Alicent could take this to mean, oh, he changed his mind. And with his dying breath, this is what he asked of me. So this is what she's trying to do. So in the mind of the Greens, they have not usurped the throne. They are simply doing the bidding of the king before he died. But Alicent goes on to tell her father that she can feel his anger in the small council meetings and that he continues to usurp her voice there because both of her sons look at him as a great example. The hand to 3 kings. And that she also realizes that Aemond is angry because Rhaenyra's son took his eye and was never ever punished for it. Now, Otto tells his daughter that Aemond is loyal and ultimately wishes to please before she tells him that Aegon hates her in private. And, she also asks Otto to stop undermining her voice. She seems to think that once the novelty of rule is spent for Aegon, that he'll be much easier to control and that the two of them can steer the Greens' cause to victory without much trouble. Now, Otto tells her that that's a nice thought, but that she has to accept that with all that has transpired to this point, that the path to victory will now include violence. Now, Alicent says out loud that she understands that fact, but that doesn't mean that it should be what she wants. And I understand that. Now, back on Dragonstone, the Valyrian fleet catches Mysaria on a boat trying to break the blockade, and Daemon gets a hold of her and he wants her remanded and treated as a traitor, essentially for aiding the Hightowers in their efforts to place Aegon on the throne. Now, Eric Carlisle, with an E, tries to cape up for Mysaria, but Daemon just doesn't want to hear it. And he tells Eric that he had Aegon in his clutches and that he should have ended him. And Eric tells Daemon that they had sworn to protect the royal family, but didn't know what to do in the event that the royal family turned on each other. And just then we hear a dragon cry out. And it's Rhaenyra, finally arriving back on Dragonstone. And she enters the castle and walks into her own small council. And when she gets there, Daemon asks if she got what she needed. She shakes her head yes. She walks over to the table and she stands before everyone. And she essentially demands Aemon Targaryen, as in the death of Aemon Targaryen, as recompense for the death of her son Luke, which I have to say I find a little hilarious because when Luke put Aemon's eye out last season, she would not let Alicent get revenge for said thing. So for her wanting revenge now and not being willing to take the high road is just kind of, a bit crazy to me. And it just shows, her shifting moral standards, right? So when my son does something to your son, you need to just deal. And then when your son does something to my son, I got to get clean. And this is kind of one of the problems that I've had with Rhaenyra is just that she's kind of all over the place. She just kind of does whatever she wants with no rhyme or reason to it at all. So anyway, after Rhaenyra makes her wishes known, Daemon goes to Mysaria, the White Worm, and he offers her her freedom if she'll help him by giving him knowledge of her network of spies in King's Landing. So, Prince Jacaerys, all these heiresses, Jacaerys, all that, But Prince Jacaerys arrives and he tells his mother that he has secured the support of the Vale and the North before he cries in his mother's arms over the death of his brother. Now, we see Alicent in the bowels of the Red Keep, where she typically goes to pray and light candles. And while she's there, she lights a candle for Viserys. And then after giving it some thought, she lights one for Luke as well. So again, Alicent never wanted Luke to be killed. In fact, she gets on Aemon for having done so. And so at the same time, we see the blacks on a cliff outside of Dragonstone, kind of having a ceremony of their own, mourning the loss of Lucerys. So next, we find Daemon on the boat, sailing on the boat. No mermaids. But he sneaks into King's Landing, and we've seen this before, right? I mean, they really got to do something with security out there, because I mean, you can just row your boat right up to the palace, and that's kind of crazy. But once he gets to the gate of the Red Keep, he bribes a guard, a city watchman, no doubt somebody that Mysaria told him was pliable, who happens to dislike the Hightowers very, very much. And that person lets him into the Red Keep, and from there he finds the Ratcatcher. Remember, we saw him earlier in the episode, Chekhov's gun. And he offers him money to find and do away with Aemon. And after some cajoling, the Ratcatcher does agree, because he's got some debts apparently. But he then asks Daemon what he should do if Prince Aemon cannot be found. And we don't get an answer, but it can be assumed that Daemon simply relays to him that he needs a son for a son. You know what I mean? So next, we find Aemon and Sir Criston Cole sitting in a room making battle plans in private away from the small council. And Aemon seems to be bothered by the fact that his mother seems to blame him for, quote-unquote, starting the war, even though she plotted with the members of the small council to usurp the throne. And that's not exactly what happened. Because, in fact, when she found out that other members of the small council were seeking to usurp the throne, she had a virtual fit about it. And it was only, after she had, decided that, Viserys really wanted Aemon to sit the throne, that she even decided to kind of go along with what they wanted to do, because she just understood that that was kind of going to be the only way it was going to get done. He claims that his mother speaks with two tongues. She's basically two-faced, right? He don't like it. And so Criston blames Rhaenyra for drawing Alicent into her web, because of course he does, because he's a simp. And there's nothing more dangerous than an emotional male, right? Somebody who can't keep their emotions in check. And to be real with you, I don't even know what Criston Cole thought was going to come of him and Rhaenyra. I mean, you knew she was going to be queen when you started smashing. I just think you should have stood 10 toes down and just not given in to her and not given her what she wanted. And I think everybody would have been a lot better off. But I digress. Aemon thinks that his mother being, drawn into Rhaenyra's, whatever, makes her a fool. And just then, Sir Otto shows up and dismisses Cole, and he sits down with Aemon and tries to counsel patience, telling Aemon that he must keep a grip on his impulses in order to kind of provide a balance between he and his brother, because that was going to be necessary for what was going to come next. So, speaking of next, we find the Ratcatcher and the city watchman, now dressed in ordinary clothes, sneaking into the Red Keep through a sewer. And once they get inside, man, they walk right past the king, who is sitting on the Iron Throne drinking with a couple of his friends and laughing and joking. And again, I think this little detail is meant to show just how Aegon is slipping on his pimping as king. And, because he's not really paying attention to what's going on around him, even though the situation absolutely dictates that he needs to be, right? Tensions are high right now, and everybody needs to be paying attention, on high alert. So the fact that these two are able to walk right past him and him not even seeming to know that two people walked through the throne room while he was sitting there was just kind of wild. But the pair continues through the palace, finally entering a room through a secret entrance. The very room, in fact, where Aemon and Sir Criston Cole were strategizing earlier, or basically talking about these chicks. And now they ignore the map and the coin sitting on top of it. The city watchman doesn't ignore the coins. He takes the coins, though he doesn't quite know what they mean. And he is seen by one of the new handmaids. In fact, it's the same handmaid with the bushy eyebrows that we saw in the room with Helena. And when Aegon came in looking for his son, and who was initially helping to bathe Alicent before she was dismissed. Now, the city watchman puts down the rat traps and he pretends to set one, kind of trying to, hey, everything's fine. Like, I'm just here to set traps kind of thing. And I think he was absolutely going to bum rush her and do away with her. But when he looks up, the handmaid is gone. She already knew what the beat was. She like, let me go ahead and slide. Now the city watchman gives chase, but loses her in the dark castle. But then he hears a sound and follows the noise, and here is where he finds the rat catcher in a room with a knife to Helena's neck. And when the city watchman enters the room and asks who she is, the rat catcher tells him, oh, this is the queen. Now, the city watchman insists that they are supposed to take a son for a son and nothing else. So he clearly has no desire to see Helena done away with. They then have Helena tell them which twin is the boy. And man, they take this young man's head in his crib, blood and cheese. As Helena grabs Jaehaera, her daughter, and spirits her out of the room. And I gotta say, this scene hit so hard because I can only imagine what it had to be like for Helena to kind of be processing the information as this whole situation, this whole ordeal is happening, and being like, okay, one of my children is going to die. And I've got to decide who. And then as her son is accosted in his crib, essentially, she's got to have the presence of mind to grab her daughter and spirit her out of the room. Again, where we can hear the sounds of her other kid's head being taken. It was so, I was like, man, I just, that was a hard scene to kind of like really kind of grasp as you're watching it. It was a lot. And this happened a little bit different in the book than it does in the show, because in the books, Blood and Cheese came upon Alicent in the Tower of the Hand, and they bound and gagged her while Blood beat her handmaid to death. And Blood and Cheese then waited for the arrival of Queen Helena and her children, as the two assassins knew that it was the queen's custom of taking her children to see their grandmother before putting them to bed every night. And that particular night, when Helena arrived with the 3 children, not 2, Blood killed her guard before proceeding to grab her eldest son, Prince Jaehaerys, while Cheese took hold of her younger son, Prince Maelor. And though Blood had warned Helena that she and her children would all die if she screamed, it is said that the queen remained calm, as so the story goes. And when she demanded the identity of the 2 assassins, Cheese stated that he and Blood are debt collectors and that a debt had been owed, an eye for an eye, a son for a son. But he assured Helena that neither she nor anyone else would be killed. So when he asked her on which of her sons she wanted to die, the queen pleaded with them to do away with her instead, but was turned down, and Blood reminds her that it has to be a son. Now, Cheese warns Helena that Blood will assault her daughter, Princess Jaehaera, out of boredom if she doesn't make a choice soon. And when she was once again forced to make the impossible choice under threat that all of her children would be done away with, the queen tearfully chose Maelor. And it's unknown why Queen Helena chose her youngest son over the eldest. I think she believed that Maelor was too young to understand, or maybe it's because Prince Jaehaerys was the king's firstborn son and heir. And seeing that she had chosen Maelor, Cheese whispered into the boy's ear, saying, "You hear that, little boy? Your mama wants you dead." He then grins at Blood, which signals to him to kill Prince Jaehaerys instead, which is what he does, decapitating the boy with a single swing of his sword, to Queen Helena's horror, and she does indeed begin to scream. Now, Blood and Cheese leaving with Prince Jaehaerys' head right after doing away with him. That night, when Helena arrived with her 3 children, again, like I said, that is how it differs from what happened in the books. And they left the room and they did not do away with anybody else, even though, Helena was warned that her children would all be done away with if she screamed. But, they did what they had to do and they left. Now, in the show, Helena only has the 2 kids, 1 boy and 1 girl. And I think this was why. This very moment was made simpler, I think, for television. And so we got a watered down version of what I think is actually what starts the war. That would ultimately be referred to as the Dance of the Dragons. Anyway, from there, Helena bursts into her mother's chamber to find Alicent and Sir Criston doing what folks do, what grown folks do. But either she doesn't have the mental bandwidth to be freaked out by it, or she already knew it was happening. Either one. But she cowers in the corner, clutching Jaehaera. And when her mother hops off of Sir Criston long enough to ask what has happened, she states quite simply, they killed the boy. So look, this episode was the setup for what's to come. As I tell you guys, the first episodes of seasons typically are. But we get to the get down fairly quickly here, as I expect for things to jump completely off sometime over the course of the next episode. And I gotta say, guys, I absolutely love Game of Thrones. And though this is a spinoff, I consider House of the Dragon to absolutely be Game of Thrones in no uncertain terms. And, you know, this show is, I'm just going to warn you guys, this show is going to be what I'm going to be about for the rest of the summer. Like, I'll go ahead and tell you right now. And I do want to give the showrunners a shout out because they did something that I didn't think they would be able to do, especially given the debacle that was the last couple of seasons of GOT. They over-delivered here. So far, they've done an amazing job of keeping Game of Thrones the same kind of Game of Thrones energy with this show. And so I'm very excited to see, you know, what this season has in store for us. And, you know, this show is absolutely, like I said, going to be appointment viewing for me. Now, in conclusion as well, I am Team Green, and I am Team Green primarily because I don't trust Rhaenyra to make decisions. She's proven over the course of the last season that she is the last person that should be making decisions that's going to impact everyone because she has main character syndrome. She wanted to be the first queen of Westeros, but she wanted it on her terms. And everything that she did from the moment her father put that crown on her head, it was done to absolutely make it more difficult for her to sit the throne. Every decision, every choice that was made from that moment, she's tried to make it absolutely as difficult as possible for her to actually get the very thing she claims she wants so badly. And so, when you add Rhaenys, when you add Corlys, who let his own brother be killed so that a non-Valyrian could become the Lord of the Tides, when you factor in Daemon, who does Daemon things all the time, I just can't be Team Black. Because I would challenge anyone to tell me that after what you saw tonight in episode 1 of season 2, that you think that what Daemon just did, oh, that's just cool. That's just the way things go, right? Now, I will say this. If you're telling me that Rhaenyra wants Aemon's head because of what happened to Luke, I get that. But what happened to Luke happened because Luke took Aemon's eye and nothing was done about it. And all the adults stood around and they let Aemon's eye be taken, and nobody did anything. I'm not even stating that it should have been an eye for an eye, but I mean, ground legit, take away his dragon privilege for a little while, no PS5, something. And when you as adults don't solve this problem for the kids solve it for themselves. And as you can see, you know, Rhaenyra over the long run, she played herself. And I just, you know, again, the writers kind of did, I think, a disservice to Rhaenyra on a couple of fronts. But when it comes to Aemon killing Luke, the writers made this look like an accident. And so it kind of makes you view it a little bit differently, even though, like I said, I would understand if Rhaenyra wanted Aemon's head. I'm like, I get it. But to basically walk into the castle and saw off a young kid's head, not Aemon, someone else, that's absolutely wild to me. But that's my rant on that for now. I'll make another video that goes into point by point why I do not support Team Black. But other than that, like I said, this show is going to be absolutely appointment viewing for me for the foreseeable future. But what do you guys think? Did you guys enjoy the first episode of the new season? If so, what's your favorite storyline so far? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you that might be new to the channel, be sure to like and share this video. If you really like the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified when I drop a new video. Also, be sure to go and check out themadScreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and info on my upcoming film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write. I'll catch y'all in the next video.